Good day, everybody. I'm Michael Shaw with Berkshire Hathaway, HomeServices, Real-Time Realty. Today, we're going to talk about the most misunderstood paragraph of the Residential Purchase and Sales Agreement, the RPA. That paragraph is the liquidated damages clause. This is to be used during a breach of contract. What happens when you have a breach of contract? Generally, what happens is somebody's going to sue another person. So what happens is, if you go to court, you must prove that somebody has breached the contract. That's one part of it. But the second part of that is to prove what the damages are from that breach. Well, liquidated damages saves the person from doing that second part. They still must prove there was a breach of contract, but they don't need to prove what the damages were. Liquidated damages states what the damages are. Now, in our contract, liquidated damages are only for the buyer. It says what the buyer's damages would be. So if the buyer defaults on the contract, this is what it is going to be. It's going to be the lesser amount of the deposit that the buyer put down, or 3% of the contract price if they're buying a single family home with 4 or less units and they're going to be occupying it. Let me give you some examples of that then. With a $500,000 house and they put down a deposit of $1,000 and they default, their loss would be $1,000, the entire amount of the deposit. If, however, they put down $50,000, then their loss would only be $15,000. 3% of $500,000 house is $15,000. So the most they can lose is 3%. So even though they put down $50,000 as their deposit, only $15,000 would be kept as damages. They'd be returned the other $35,000. The release of funds, though, is not automatic. Both parties can agree to release the funds, of course, in escrow. Otherwise, you're going to have to reach a conclusion in a court or an arbitration agreement to get the funds back. So your buyers and sellers should be aware of that. Now, as I said, if the seller defaults, that's something entirely different. Liquidated damage clause does not apply to the seller, only to the buyer. So if the seller defaults, the buyer must prove a breach of contract by the seller, but then they also must prove what the damages were to them. So once again, liquidated damages clause is only for the buyers. Now, when you have to be careful here, because if you're representing the seller and you get a liquidated damages clause that's signed by the buyer and they put down $1,000 on a $500,000 house, well, that's not going to cover the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance for even 1 month. And if they hold that property off the market for a couple of months, that's not very much to recover for the seller. So what do? Well, if we have a VA or an FHA loan, of course, the person's going to put down a very little amount because they're going to get a loan that's going to cover most of the down payment to begin with. You may want to decide about that. But if it's a conventional loan, maybe you ask for more money. You'd say, look, we want a bigger deposit down, up to the 3%. Otherwise, you may want to have your seller consider not initialing the liquidated damages clause. In other words, not agreeing to that. If they don't agree to that, that means now they have to go to court, prove a breach of contract, and prove what the damages are. But pretty clear, they can prove that damages are more than $1,000 if they're selling a $500,000 house and the house is off the market for 1 or 2 months. If you have an increased deposit, you should be aware that when you increase the deposit, you must once again approve a liquidated damages clause. The CAR form, RID, does that automatically. So always use that when you increase your deposit. Thank you for listening to this week's story. Once again, from Berkshire Hathaway, HomeServices, Real-Time Realty, this is Michael Shaw.